an epiphenomena generated by the brain.
An emergent phenomenon.
An emergent phenomena. This is saying, no, actually consciousness is more fundamental, and the brain's role is actually almost to limit your experience. So the consciousness is there, but when you see the world through these eyes and hear it through these ears, in some sense, the brain is limiting your experience, which is on the face of it, that might seem a completely bizarre thing to say, but that at least is the alternative view, that the consciousness is not actually generated by the brain, but merely perceives the world through the brain.
Many scientists would say that.
That's fine, and of course that's what we call a promissory materialistic view, that will happen. But the trouble is, at the moment, no one has any idea whatsoever, neither physicists nor neuroscientists, how the experience of consciousness, first personhood, is actually generated. We know a huge amount about the correlations between our experience and what goes on in the brain, and of course that's hugely important. I'm not saying that's not a crucial question, but having a picture in which, in some sense, consciousness is primary, that consciousness is a fundamental element of the universe. It isn't, in other words, it's not just generated as a result at the end point of physical processes. In some sense, it's there from the beginning. It's a primary, a fundamental component rather than a secondary component of the universe.
This is a view that some people have.
Microscopic and macroscopic is going to involve higher dimensions, and that is where mind and consciousness will come in. So when people say, how do I fit mind, how do I fit consciousness into the cosmic Ouroboros, which is the description of the triumph of physics, my answer is, it must, in some sense, consciousness is everywhere, but in some sense, explicitly, it must come in at the top where the head meets the tail. That is why I like to think the final theory that marries quantum theory and relativity theory is going in some sense to accommodate mind and consciousness. And that's because that's where the higher dimensions are coming in.
Well, what is fascinating about consciousness is that it involves the passage of time. When you say I am conscious, one can argue about what you mean by conscious. There's a distinction between the contents of consciousness, which is what I'm normally referring to when I talk about a space of consciousness, but the experience of consciousness itself.
This must change. You should not say space like this.
Ah, I should go like this. Thank you, yeah. Okay, so conscious, space like that, yeah. And hopefully time like this, which means the chairman can't stop me if I... Yeah. Anyway, the point is this. What you've got to realize, in Einstein, with his theory of special relativity, he married up space and time. He realized that the world is four-dimensional, with the fourth dimension being time. And so, you as a human being, your body is like a world line in this. You imagine space and time in two dimensions. I hope I can use my hands, but you imagine space and time in two dimensions to make it simpler. You are like a line, your world line in this four-dimensional space, but is represented as two-dimensional space. But in Einstein's picture, it's called the block universe. Past, present, and future coexist. There is no time. But in your conscious experience, you think of yourself as moving through time. So if you imagine your world line as a brain, you sort of think of your consciousness as like a little bead which is traveling along that wire. That's your experience. So right now it's 10 to 5, but it'll be 5 o'clock in 10 minutes, and it was 4:45 5 minutes ago. But the point is that does not happen in relativity theory. In relativity theory, there is no passage of time. And this is well understood. And this is why many physicists and philosophers say it is an illusion. The passage of time is an illusion. And yet we all experience it. Now, what I'm saying is that mind, the experience of consciousness, is not actually part of our current picture of physics. It's not part of relativity. And the passage, nor is passage of time really in quantum theory. Time has a different status in quantum theory. So how do you explain this? Well, the way various philosophers have explained it, including myself, is you have to say there is an extra dimension, which is an extra dimension of time, which corresponds, if you like, to mental time as opposed to physical time. And so this is why I say current physics, meaning relativity theory and quantum theory, cannot explain the experience of consciousness. But the final theory of physics, which is going to reconcile relativity and quantum theory, that has to explain consciousness, and it has to include this extra dimension. Because what I'm saying is mental time is an extra dimension. Is that okay? Right? Everyone's convinced? Good. Now, but there's another feature of consciousness which is really crucial. And this is to do with what I call the specious present. This is the minimum time scale of experience. You see, when we're normal human beings, there's a minimum time we can experience, which is something like 1/10 of a second. You imagine my finger is a light. If I move this light around in a circle, you will see that light going round, okay? But if it goes round too fast, if it goes round more than 10 times a second, you won't see it as motion. You'll see a continuous light. Okay, so there is no time on a time scale less than 1/10 of a second, which is basically the specious present. On the other hand, if this little light moves around too slowly, you won't see it moving either. And that's to do with the time scale of memory. So our experience of time only extends over a really short range of times, from something like 1/10 of a second to maybe 1,000 seconds. Okay? That's what we mean by human consciousness. So this concept of the specious present is a very old concept. It actually goes back to William James. It goes back more than 100 years. But even many philosophers don't talk about it. So consciousness comes with a specious present. And our specious present is essentially roughly, say, 1/10 of a second. Now, we as humans are very arrogant. We assume that that is the only level of consciousness in the universe. Well, at least...
Not humans,
no, exactly.
physicists.
Yeah, well, yes, yeah. Okay, absolutely. Well, I suppose, exactly. When I say humans arrogantly, I don't mean all humans. I mean especially most of my scientific colleagues would assume that we are the most important form of consciousness. Obviously not the Guru, probably not most of you. But the question is, therefore, this specious present, I said it's 1/10 of a second, but actually it can change, and we all know it can change in certain circumstances. I expect you had the experience. You're in a crisis situation. Say you're falling off a mountain. I don't know if anyone's ever fallen off a mountain, but you know, time seems to slow down. Or maybe you're in a car accident, and the outside world, everything seems to be in slow motion. That's because your specious present has sort of shrunk, and so that happens. You can have another experience, for example, where your specious present expands. I know of a case of someone who was very ill, was lying in bed, and saw this flashing light at the window, and couldn't work out what it was. But it turned out this flashing light was the rising and the setting of the sun. But their specious present had expanded so that it seemed to be a flashing light. It's a question of the relationship between your mental time and physical time. Now, of course, most neuroscientists would probably think that can be explained because there must be some sort of clock in time inside the brain. So, for example...
one second.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of things, if each one of those things, if we unpack together...
Absolutely,
it'll be
yes,
good,
yes.
because you're saying so many things, we will, by the time we come back...
No, but so are you, so it's